So last week I had a look at my favourite games of 2020. Now, the thing is, I've played a lot more games in 2020, apart from games that released in 2020, and I kind of want to talk about some fun stuff that I played last year, because I have a massive backlog of games and I'm trying my best to chip away at them. It's not going that well, but I'm doing my best. But I decided I'm going to talk about some of my favourites of those games that I played that didn't come out in 2020, but I played them in 2020. So this is a bit of a free-for-all. The only eligibility for this list is I have to have played it in 2020, but it can't have come out in 2020 because those games are already covered last week. So why a top 12? Because I kept adding games to it and it was going to be a top 10, became a top 12. What are you going to do about it? It's my channel. So without further ado, let's jump straight in to number 12. So kind of like Crusader Kings in last week's video, this is an entry that is very last minute, very last minute, as in I recorded my first impressions of it for the advent calendar that none of you watched, and then continued playing more of it and really enjoyed it. Forza Motorsport 7 is a really fun racing game. I kind of like racing games here and there. I'm not super into them, but I will happily play them, and this was on Game Pass and I got into it and I was like, I'm going to play a bunch of it. It's really fun all the way through. You have a variety of different races and the cars really do handle very differently across the board, and I like that. It's great. The only ones that I didn't enjoy were the Formula 1 type events because I just don't know how to control those cars, but that's just me, that's a personal preference. I think it is very accurate to how those types of cars handle, but the rally stuff was fun, the touring car stuff was fun. And some of the sort of quirkier ones, like there's weird like special events like car bowling, which is really fun and weird. There's not really a lot to say about it, it's just a really fun racing game and I had a lot of fun with it. Oh, and you can download skins for cars, I mean paint jobs for cars, that would make more sense. People have made all sorts of things, like I made a Van the Mystery Machine from Scooby-Doo because someone had made that, and one of the options for the Mini was Mr. Bean's Mini, and I thought that was funny. But yeah, it was just a really fun racing game and I had fun with it, and I really wanted to include it on this list at number 12 because I enjoyed it, and at the end of the day, is that not what games are about? I got into Alan Wake because of Control, which was my game of the year last year. But I'd never gotten around to playing Alan Wake because it was an Xbox exclusive back in the day and I had no way of playing it, whereas now it's on Game Pass on my PC, so I was able to just go, oh, I can play it now. And I wanted to jump into it before the AWE DLC got released for Control, so I knew what was going on in that DLC. And also, you know, because I ended up making that video, I had that planned all along. I didn't make that very obvious in the intro because I was trying to hide that it was ultimately about let's talk about Control again, but that is why I played it and I really enjoyed it. The story is bizarre and there's a lot of really clever ideas. It's not as good as Control, oh no, I don't think that at all, and certainly I found some of the combat got a little bit tiresome to the point where I put it on easy towards the end of the game because I was just kind of like, well, my problem is that every enemy's kind of not necessarily a bullet sponge, but a light sponge. Other than that, like I really enjoyed the setting, I really enjoyed the weird story, I enjoyed trying to figure out like how it all worked because it just didn't make a lot of sense, but also did make sense. It was, I don't know, stuff going on in that game. But Alan Wake is an idiot. He's just not a fun character, but I think that kind of works for the type of game that it is. Like he comes across as an asshole, but you kind of get the feeling that that's very much the intent, that he's basically like rock star writer, and then his world gets turned upside down and he realizes that, you know, he's basically a bit of an ass, and that's cool. I like that. I like that they dared to do that. It's not Control, but it's still a fun game. I really enjoyed Alan Wake. Yeah. Detention is a horror game that I have been eager to play for a while. It's just always appealed to me, this idea that it's all about ghosts, but it's also about real world events that are also horrible. And it's definitely a little bit rough around the edges. You can tell this was made on a low budget. But ultimately, it's a really, really interesting point-and-click horror type thing. I really liked the atmosphere of this game. It was spooky, it was oppressive, it was tense, and it kept that up for the whole run. And then as the story goes on and it layers more things on to do with the reality of events going on in Taiwan, because it's all tied around to actual events in Taiwan and just historical things that I didn't know anything about, and it was really interesting to play in that setting and get a horror setting which had all these supernatural elements, but then gradually became more and more about like the real horrors that exist in the world. It was a very tragic story, but I feel it was kind of an important one in a weird way, and considering that the issues that the developer has had with their follow-up game, it's definitely an interesting one to look at. We can kind of see that relationship that Taiwan has with China and all that sort of stuff. This kind of really highlights some of the horrific elements that have occurred in history as a result. I expected this to be good, and it lived up to its expectations. It's not perfect, again, very low budget, comes across that way, but I really, really liked its attention. This was the year I kind of got back into Assassin's Creed. I haven't played an Assassin's Creed game since 3, I don't think. And this year I kind of finally got around to picking up some of the other ones that I'd got lying around. I played Origins and I played Black Flag, and I kind of put them together in one entry because it's Assassin's Creed, it follows the formula. And even though Origins is the one where they slightly changed the formula, they're still the same formula, ultimately. Haven't played Valhalla, but that's because I kind of don't want to support Ubisoft, which are a company that, you know, have protected sexual predators for years. Occasionally, probably while these two games are in development. It's a very important thing I need to bring up every time that I talk about Ubisoft, even though the games themselves are excellent. I really enjoyed them. I really liked the protagonists of both of these. Both Bayek and Edward Kenway were protagonists that I kind of liked. I like protagonists that are a bit more roguish, because sometimes some of the Assassin's Creed characters, looking at you Connor and looking at you Altair, are kind of a bit bland, whereas obviously Ezio and Bayek and Edward, they kind of made them a little bit more interesting, a little bit rough around the edges and really interesting. Basically the Assassin's Creed formula, but they both got interesting stuff going on. I kind of liked the Egypt setting. It reminded me a lot of Tomb Raider 4 at times. Shut up. I really like Black Flag because the ship stuff was just great, just getting to sail off into the sea, which in a year where I haven't been able to leave my house most of the time, it's been nice to just get on a virtual ship and sail off into the oceans and see all these exotic places. That was nice. But yeah, they were both really fun experiences, but yeah, they are kind of still the same game. Assassin's Creed hasn't really changed since 2, which is why I stopped playing it, just kind of got bored of it, but it's still a really good game at its heart. But that's why I kind of grouped them together. My friend Ryan will tell you that Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening is the greatest Zelda game ever made. He is factually wrong because it's Majora's Mask, but I did play the remake of Link's Awakening that came out last year, 2019, you know what I mean. It's the new year, it's confusing. Anyway, the point is, I played the remake of Link's Awakening on the Switch, and I thought it was very fun. It's not Majora's Mask, but it's still a really fun Zelda game, and it's a really weird one as well, and I kind of liked it for that, because it does stuff that isn't very Zelda-like. Things like the platforming that's in there, and the very weird dream world that it's all kind of set in, where things don't really make sense, and you've got all these references to other Nintendo games, like you've got Mario stuff in there, and you've got like a character from that weird game on the Game Boy that never got released in the West, which has got like the boy who can turn into a frog, I think. I only know it because there's an assist trophy in Smash Brothers. I know nothing else about it, but I recognize the prince from one of the spirits as well. And he's in there. I don't know why he's in there, but it's at its core still a really fun Zelda game. And I think the Switch version feels like the definitive version, because I've not played the Game Boy original, but I have seen how it plays, and I'm just like, oh god, after playing this Switch version, I don't think I could ever go and play that Game Boy version. That looks horrendous to play now in comparison, because they kind of opened everything up and, you know, moved away from like the single screen things where everything was on a tiny little screen. It worked for, you know, what it was at the time, but obviously this version's just built it up so much. It's such a fun Zelda game with a weird premise, some weird stuff going on, and I really enjoyed my time with it. Devil May Cry 5 is probably the best Devil May Cry game. I think a few people expressed this when it came out, but I was late to the party. It's one hell of a party, but I was late to it. You see what I did there? Anyway, I really enjoyed it. It was a really fun... I think they've really refined the combat system. Like, there's so much stuff to do, and I think, from what I remember, other Devil May Cry games didn't really let you switch Dante's styles on the fly, but Devil May Cry 5 absolutely does. Oh my god. It changes everything, and it makes it so much more fun. I found it so frustrating in some of the older ones where you had to, like, select the style before going into a level and trying to figure that out, because sometimes I'd be like, sometimes I want this move and sometimes I want to be able to do this, and you have to be able to switch with them on the fly. Devil May Cry 5 does that, and it's great. And I also just like the story just does not take itself seriously, and that is great because it's Devil May Cry. You know, it's not high art, it's just we're going to fight some demons with a guy in a flashy coat with a sword and guns, and he likes to say showtime a lot. That's all it is, and it's great, and it does that very, very well, and I really enjoyed Devil May Cry 5. I like Nero and I like Dante. Wasn't super keen on V as a playable character. I wasn't into his style, the sort of goth Pokemon trainer thing. Wasn't super into it, but on the whole, didn't affect me enjoying the other two so much, and yeah, just I had a blast with Devil May Cry 5. I quite like running a comedy hospital. It's a lot of fun. Although, you know, playing this in the midst of a pandemic and all that, probably a little bit in bad taste. But my play time of it overlapped with the beginnings of quarantine and all that. But it doesn't really make me think of that because, well, when the illnesses include things like lightheaded, which your head gets replaced by a light bulb, because, you know, that's a pun, you see, it's funny. But yeah, other than that, it's just a goofy little hospital game. It's so funny, but it's also really fun as a management strategy game type thing. I like these sorts of games anyway. I played Theme Park back in the day. Never played the original Theme Hospital though, but I really enjoyed 2 Point Hospital. It was stupid fun, and the ridiculous radio announcements and the songs that you'd get on the radio sometimes. There were 2 songs that sometimes would pop up with vocals, and they were very silly because one of them, for instance, was saying, "You've got a nice smelling face," which, okay. But the actual gameplay is really fun as well. It's surprisingly difficult at times. If you're not managing things properly, it will just punish you very, very easily if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. And I kind of liked that about it because it basically forced you to really pay attention to how you were managing this hospital. And if you weren't doing a good job of it, well, you were going to screw up, weren't you? You were going to fail. But it always felt like it was your fault. There was always a reason for why you did that. And yeah, it was just a really fun experience, really fun environment. Getting to build a comedy hospital is a personal dream of mine. It isn't, but you know, let's just say it is, because I approve of 2 Point Hospital. This War of Mine is a really interesting take on this sort of management genre, It's kind of funny that I've put this right next to 2 Point Hospital because they couldn't be tonally more different, but gameplay-wise, so similar. So this War of Mine is a good few years old now, but it is basically set during a civil war somewhere in Eastern Europe. I think it might be sort of based around some of the Bosnia conflict from the 90s, from what I'm aware of. But it basically presents like, what is it like to live in those conditions, and you have a group of people that you have to try and keep alive and have them survive the war as best as you can. It's difficult because they've basically just found themselves a house, a shelter somewhere. It's basically just an abandoned house somewhere, and they're trying to just survive there. So you have to go out and find food and materials and medicine and this sort of thing. But of course, everything's scarce because there's a civil war going on. Everyone's sort of fighting each other. So if you go to certain places, you will encounter resistance. In other places, you'll be forced to make the decision of whether or not you want to steal from like old people or something who are just innocent and just trying to get by like you are. And I really liked this. It's really, really difficult, but that's kind of the point. It's trying to hammer home that message of war is hell, and this is the kind of reality of what it's like living through that. Taking that sort of experience and turning it into a game in a way that tries to educate is a really, really interesting way of doing this sort of game. And I highly approve of what it was going for. And enjoying it is a difficult thing, but I appreciated what it was doing, and I really liked this experience. Observation is a fascinating game. It is a game all about a spaceship AI who you control. That is the character that you play as. It is the spaceship AI, so it's a realistic space station. It's not like a fantasy space station. It's one that's very much grounded in reality, so it's pretty much modules all duct taped together and just kind of thrown into space. But there's weird stuff going on. It's basically been flung into the deep regions of space far from Earth, and you've got to try and figure out what's going on. You've got an astronaut who is trying to figure out what's going on, and you're trying to help her out, but you're kind of very limited. And it is a really, really interesting take on horror, because as the AI, you are very limited in what you can do. You can only really interact with the systems of the ship. You can't physically interact with a lot of the ship, and that's an interesting take, and you can only see certain parts of it based on what the cameras can show. So there's always this feeling that something's kind of lurking off in the corners and you can't see what it is because the camera doesn't pan that far. The atmosphere of this thing was so creepy the whole time. I don't know what was going on in the ending. I'm not going to spoil it, but it was bizarre. Very 2001, but also, if 2001 was consistently a horror and not some weird philosophical musing on the nature of existence, I think is what 2001 is. But Observation's more like, something spooky's going on, be warned. Every part of this is done really well. Like, the creeping dread of it is brilliant, and it's genuinely tense, and it's genuinely uncomfortable at times because of your limited interactivity. And then when weird stuff happens, it just happens and they don't explain it, and it just makes it worse. And it just looks great as well. It almost looks real. Everything about Observation. Absolutely loved this game. A Plague Tale Innocence is what happens when someone tries to make The Last of Us on a budget but still tries to retain what made The Last of Us good as best as it could with limited resources, because this is basically about a brother and sister who are trying to just survive in the midst of the 100 Years' War, I think, and also the plague. Whichever war happened during the plague between France and England. So you've got to fight off soldiers, but you've also got these weird, creepy, supernatural rats that spread the plague. And I say spread the plague, more just they will strip the skin off your bones in seconds, because that's totally how plague rats worked. I will allow it for narrative purposes. It's a fine game all around. It's a little bit rough around the edges, you can tell it was made on a budget. It's a Focus Home Interactive game. You know, it's published by them, so the budget was probably like, you get enough to feed the staff a lunch break once a week maybe. But they did a really good job with the resources that they had, because the relationship between the two siblings is really believable. You've got a child character that isn't obnoxious, like you genuinely kind of want to look out for this kid, even though he acts like a kid at times, you just want to protect him. Yeah, I just really liked the whole oppressive atmosphere of it, really liked the gameplay mechanics that were a little bit limited here and there, but it's just the nature of how the game was made, really. But on the whole, A Plague Tale was a really good experience. Really love playing through this, and I commend the team for putting something this impressive together with the resources that they had. You know all about this one. I enjoyed this one so much I made a video on it to tell you why it was so rad. Resident Evil 2 Remake was a phenomenally good remake of an already great classic game that just took everything that made that original game so compelling and kind of stripped out all the stuff that made it clunky and awkward and dated, and the result is this really excellent game. Like, everything works as far as I'm concerned. I think the only complaint that I would have is that they kind of stripped out the way the two storylines interact with each other, and I feel like that should have still been in there. But other than that, the actual gameplay of it is really fun. It's the whole exploration, figuring out puzzles and figuring out where you're going with limited resources that makes Resident Evil such a good game. It did it really well, and it did the over-the-shoulder camera, but that changes a lot of things because they couldn't do the fixed camera angles and hide things from you with those camera angles, but they managed to make a lot of it work. Like, I've talked plenty of times in various places about how good the liquor introduction was and how they changed all that up. I really loved what they did there just to subvert expectations. It was so good, and it just looks great as well. Like, both Leon and Claire just look amazing, and I'm telling you all this stuff as if I haven't already made a video going over all these points. Even Mr. X with the chase sequences, which is potentially annoying, because it was certainly annoying when Nemesis jumped out of walls in Resident Evil 3, the original. So I was a little bit wary about that, but it actually really worked really well, and I did not find him obnoxious. I found him genuinely tense to be around, and that's how you know you got a good thing. Resident Evil 2 is rad. I made a video on it, go watch that, you get the full points on it, but otherwise, it is my second favourite game this year that did not come out this year. And the number one game that I played this year that did not come out this year is Disco Elysium. And there's not really a lot that I can say about this game that hasn't already been breathlessly covered by sites all over the internet. This game won awards. It was an indie game that came out of nowhere and just wowed everyone. This game is ridiculous. It is a big, full-scale RPG that asks questions about philosophy and existentialism and political discourse, and it ties all this together with a dialogue tree system that just seems to have branches upon branches upon branches, because it seems like every single person who plays this seems to have a different experience, but it's always still an excellent experience. My experience of it was great. I was a bumbling idiot who tried to be charming as much as possible and really struggled to do that because my charm stats were really low, but that was kind of intentional. It's just a brilliant game. Like, I was gripped by this. I recorded a video on this, and after playing that, I was like, I kind of want to just keep playing this. And then I played it to the end and was like, oh my god, that was brilliant. It is one of the best games I've played. It's not the best game of 2019, that's still Control, but this I would say is now in second place, very, very close second place. Really fascinating, bizarre little world that it's setting, and just the writing is just so good all the way through. It never misses. The writing is just phenomenal. And it references the Manic Street Preachers a couple of times, which surprises me. There's so much more that could be said about it. One day I'm probably going to make a losing plot on that game because, oh my god, it's so good. And yeah, that was my favourite game that I played from this year. Overall, actually, to be perfectly honest, that was the game that wowed me the most, and it didn't even come out this year. But there you go. Disco Elysium, my favourite game that I played in 2020 that did not come out in 2020. And that's it. Those were the top 12 games that I played this year that did not come out this year, but I still had a lot of fun with and I want to sing the praises of all the same. So do you have any choices of games that you played recently that didn't come out recently? Just games that you were catching up on? I'd love to hear about it. Let me know in the comments. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and all of that. And I'll be back very soon with more stuff all about some really cool games. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time. Bye!